Welcome one, welcome all. Got a lot of really exciting stuff today to talk about. So, as a quick introduction, my name is Keegan Cotton. I'm the Director of Customer Success at Guesty. I oversee our Americas region and our APAC region. I've been with Guesty just about 4 years now. Been running the webinars for quite some time. Some of you may recognize me. Wonderful to have you back. We're speaking with a couple of panelists that I've actually personally worked with in the past, and all three are wonderful. And just from our rehearsal on Monday, I'm really excited to go through some of this info. So, as a quick introduction, today joining us, we have Melanie Brown, the Executive Director of Data Insights from Key Data, Simon Lehman, CEO and founder of AGL Atelier, and Willie Chang, co-owner and board member for Marbella Lane, which is a property management company. A quick overview of what we're going to be going through today. First, I'm just going to give you some opening words and take a look at travel trends heading into 2024, a little data aperitif, as I like to refer to it. Then we'll jump into our panelists' sessions. They're going to kind of speak about their viewpoint of where are we positioned into 2024, between the US and EMEA, between global trends that we're seeing. And then Willie's going to bring us home at the end to talk about what does all this mean for the property management company at the end of the day? What are some key takeaways? And then we'll really flesh it all out in the Q&A at the end during our panel discussion for 20 minutes. All righty. So, quick introduction before I dive into today's topic. I want to take a quick moment at the top to introduce Guesty to those of you who aren't familiar with what we do. Guesty, we're providing short-term rental hosts and property management companies with the tools they need to operate more efficiently, bring in more bookings, and ultimately grow their business and make more money. That's the goal here. So no matter how many properties you manage or what your goals are, or whether you're just getting started or a full-time professional property manager, within Guesty, we have a solution that's perfectly suited for you and your needs. As of today, we have two solutions. One is geared towards our smaller hosts who typically own 1 to 3 properties. That's our Guesty for Host solution, or our Guesty for Pro solution, which is the more robust, fully fleshed out piece of technology for people who are kind of ready for that next step. But in terms of inventory, all across the board, outdoor stays, urban rentals, apart hotel, service departments, all types of inventory are covered here and anywhere in the world as we service 80 plus countries. All right, so let's get into the data. Let's take a look at industry trends that appeared in 2023 and we're expecting to stick around in 2024 based on how they have been trending. So a prominent trend from 2023 that we're anticipating to remain strong in 24 is a mobile takeover. What I mean by this is travelers are increasingly booking on their mobile phones and in-app rather than tied to a desktop. In 23, 61% of travelers chose to book via mobile. To drill down a little bit into that, of what does that actually mean, like year over year? In 23, 61% of travelers, oh, sorry, 53% of nights on Airbnb were booked in app. And this is a 5% percentage increase from the prior year in 22. Similarly, Booking.com had 51% of nights booked in-app, which is a 6% percentage increase year over year. So that number may seem a little small, but because it's in line of pacing, we're anticipating for that to continue. And therefore, it's something on our radar that we need to be conscious of in how we're presenting our properties online. How does that actually show on mobile, which is why property management software today is kind of more relevant than ever. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We can continue on with the data here. So we talked about mobile booking trends. I'd be crazy if I didn't mention another emerging trend coming out of 2023 is, of course, artificial intelligence or AI. So another trend expected to stick around for 24 is the use of AI specifically for trip planning. Some of you may very well be aware of this, but with tools like ChatGPT, you are able to come in and say literally, hey, can you plan me a 2-week trip around, the Amalfi Coast, and it will come back to you based on information that it's sourcing from the internet and give you a plan, give you recommendations of places to stay, activities to do, so on and so forth. So as a result of this is already being heavily adopted or relatively heavily adopted by a consumer base. So on the consumer side, there have been over 11,100 monthly search queries for AI supported travel planning since March 2023. Nearly a third of US travelers, according to Forbes, are likely to use ChatGPT to plan a trip in the year 2024. So this is pretty significant, right? Because in the slide beforehand, I was talking about changes year over year with something like ChatGPT. And we were talking about a difference as small as 6% being significant. With ChatGPT, we see something 32%. What is that year over year? Well, a year before, it wasn't really around and adopted quite yet. So that's really jumping from 0% to 32%, which is huge and massive, which means we need to be aware of how can we utilize these tools to our advantage to help bolster our business and not get lost in the shuffle. So while AI is a revolution that will take some time to be fully adopted throughout the industry, leading OTAs like Expedia, Booking.com, and Trip.com all launched AI-powered tools last year, aiming to provide guests with personalized recommendations, better customer service, and faster information. Not just to have AI as a buzzword, but to use AI to actually bring additional value to the customer. So all of that big flashy tech stuff, what is that? That's great that we have these trends going on, but what does it actually look like for the bookings? We're kind of after 2020, we had a huge surge in pent-up travel demand that led to a massive increase in travel in 21 and 22. 23, a little bit more of a return to normal that kind of took some people by surprise. So what is it looking like for 2024? Is this a backslide? Is this, are we going to jump forward again? What are we seeing as of today? So Melanie was kind enough to provide us some data from Key Data here. So that's what you're seeing on the slide here. Just to break this down for you of what we're looking at here, the yellow line at the top that you're seeing is what did 2023 look like at the end of the year? How much was our adjusted paid occupancy percentage? How did that appear at the end of 23? Now, this data was pulled, Melanie, correct me if I'm wrong. This was pulled at late December. Is that correct?
It was pulled yesterday,
Oh,
Keegan.
this was pulled yesterday. Okay, all right. So it's even newer data. So what this is showing us with the blue and red lines underneath is this is showing us as of today, where are we in terms of occupancy that's already on the books for 2024? That's this dark blue line. The red line over it is looking at a year ago on January 23rd, 2023. Yes, January 23rd, 2023. Where were we in terms of occupancy on the books then? So you'll see what's happening with these red and blue lines as the year goes on is they're more or less on top of each other. So what this tells us is that as of today, it's looking like we're more or less positioned very similarly to how we were going into 2023. Now, does that mean it's going to be exactly the same? Not necessarily. And that's what we're going to dive into further in Melanie's section later on. But lastly, here, just talking about overall anticipated increase in demand. We're seeing that the occupancy levels look to be about the same, but we're seeing indicators that show an anticipated 11% increase in demand. With economic growth weakening the dollar, that's going to mean a boost in inbound and domestic travel because there's more money to be spent. All right. Enough of me blabbering on at the beginning of the webinar. Let's go ahead and get into the good stuff. I want to go ahead and hand it over here to Simon Lehman, as I mentioned, the CEO and founder of AGL Atelier. So Simon, without further ado, I would love if you could share your screen and walk us through your presentation.
Thank you, Keegan. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. From beautiful, warm Switzerland to warm Switzerland. It only took you 7 minutes to talk about AI, so that was quite impressive, Keegan.
Thank you.
Trust me, I will not do my trip planning with AI for the Amalfi Coast. I'll trust my own instincts and my own contacts to do that. And I do believe that the results that I'm going to get using my friends and family to get tips to the Amalfi Coast is going to be far superior.
Maybe Vegas is a better subject for AI than the Amalfi
I would go
Coast.
for that one. I would go for that one. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's going to be an interesting year. And I think one thing that I see ahead is mobile was also my vote. I tried to vote, but I was not allowed to. So now I'm giving my vote. It would be also mobile from my side. And definitely this year is 24 is going to be a year that we're going to consume an enormous amount of data. I mean, you already showed quite a few data points, and we're going to obviously talk more through my presentation, also Melanie's presentation. But I think with election year and many uncertainties out there, macroeconomical, and whatever, I think we will have to consume a lot of data on an ongoing basis to make sure we're getting the right indicators to make decisions on pricing and everything else. And on that, I would like to start my presentation as well. So I'm talking about trends and steps for property managers, more from a 30,000 feet point of view. I'm super happy to be here. Thank you, Keegan and Guesty, for having us. My year has already started crazy. I have had today my 12th flight since January 8th. And so I've already got a good impression of what's happening out there in the world, in the US and North America as well, which is quite incredible as well. When you go to airports, you don't seem to see that there's any slowdown in any shape or form. Today it was a strike from the German railway, so obviously that helps the airline industry as well when the German trains don't travel. So I want to first talk about travel, then talk about sort of macro trends, and then what does that translate into sort of more usable steps for property managers, the way we see it and the way we work with property managers around the world as advisors and consultants. So first of all, this is an interesting slide to see sort of how has travel overall recovered over time since 2019, based on passenger inbound numbers with the different regions. And it's interesting to see that basically APAC is still below 80% on what it used to be in terms of inbound travel, and Middle East is up 30%, so 130 index, and Europe and has sort of basically recovered entirely. The Americas as a whole is still below, while Latin America has obviously picked up quite a bit of traffic as well. So it's interesting to see we're not at the overall travel levels that we have seen in 19, and that's interesting to see in relation to the entire vacation rental industry as well. When we compare January to September 23 versus January, September 2019, it's obviously the Middle East has had massive impact overall in terms of travel. Post-COVID, it was quite interesting. Regions like the United Arab Emirates and others have highly benefited from quite lax travel bans or not restrictions, I would say, as well. And that clearly has shown a massive demand overall. So up 20%, as we said, Europe close behind 19, Africa 8%, the Americas still at 11, total world still 13% behind, total inbound travel. Interesting is that when we look at this a little bit more granular across the world, we see different patterns, and that makes it very difficult for us to sort of estimate more on a local level. Now, obviously, FYI, Qatar, there was a World Cup, so don't get too excited and open a property management business in Qatar. I wouldn't suggest that, but obviously the World Cup was there, and therefore, in a small country, an influx of a World Cup can obviously make significant impact overall. And then obviously Iran has been hammered with additional sanctions from the Western world as well. So there's some political reasons here as well. But what this shows, it just fluctuates across the world in terms of how not just regions, but countries have totally different influx on travel as well, which is interesting to see. So we can't take just data on a high level. We really need to go and start digging deeper. If you look at the UK versus then other countries, interesting. I've just had a lot of conversation with countries in Croatia, the old Yugoslavian area, Montenegro, and also Albania and other regions who are now benefiting from more budget travel as well. So we will see more increases there as well. And you see Portugal also has picked up quite a bit of business as well. So how does these trends then translate, or the numbers we're seeing, what kind of trends I would like to highlight here? So there's a couple of trends I would like to highlight. The first one, which resonated with me very strongly through the entire conference season last autumn, is this Deloitte corporate travel survey that still shows that still today, literally half of our time from a working standpoint is spent away from a physical office. So that's incredible. So I would have thought this curve would have come down a lot faster than it did post-COVID. So when everybody stayed at home, lockdowns and everything, we're 4 days a week away, and now we're still at 2.2. And that's what they predict in the future. And that has definitely a direct impact in how, and this is not just about this phenomenon called digital nomads, but this is also called remote workers and others who have different behavior and how they book, where they stay and how long they stay as well. And is the industry, the vacation rental industry, capable to cater for these travelers? And I'll get to that in a minute. The second one is the sustainability in travelers' minds. So this was the big report, the Sustainable Travel Report for 2023, where this is also driven by a newer generation who is now traveling as well, including my 23-year-old daughter. They have different travel behavior and booking behavior in terms of what they're looking for. When we talk about the term sustainability, we need to be very careful. And I don't want to, time does not permit us to go into too much detail in terms of the UN ESGs, because it's sustainability in most cases we relate directly to the climate change, global warming, which is once again severe. And I can only repeat myself. We have currently 60 degrees in Zurich, and actually it should be snowing outside. So just to give you an idea, I mean, we're just having a weather like in spring, and it's January, and people are getting aware of that. But when we talk about sustainability, we also talk about other issues. We talk about inclusion. We talk about, how fair trade, water preservation. So there's a lot of different ESGs the UN has defined, and all of that goes under the umbrella of sustainability. And for that reason, it's extremely high. So you would think 76% of travelers are looking for a more sustainable way of traveling, but that includes a lot of different aspects. Carbon offsetting is one piece, having operations that are taking care of that. And we need to take attention. We need to bring a lot of attention to that also as an industry, the vacation rental industry. And, interesting enough, we can underline that also in relation to data and how we've seen climate shift in terms of demand patterns. This is just on Europe. So this shows you clearly that the hotter it gets, the less travel that they had in Southern Europe. And the big winners are the Northern European countries, Scandinavia, Latvia, Estland, UK, Ireland, obviously. So all northern countries had a big benefit from massive heat waves, where it's 120 plus in Greece and also Spain and Cyprus. The demand started to decline, and the northern markets have picked up for that. So that's a clear shift where you can see already consumers and travel saying, "Okay, this is too hot in summer. I'm rather going to the Nordics or stay in the market and go to the mountains and et cetera, et cetera." And I would call myself and my family going in the same category as well. It's just getting too hot, and we rather be in cooler climates. And the other one I want to stress out is obviously regulations. This is something that we sound like broken records. It needs advocacy. It needs to be addressed. It's a massive threat to our industry. And once again, we can't battle this alone. We can battle that as a whole. And we need to stand together as an industry to really be aware of what's going on in terms of regulations, build advocacy, support advocacies and conversations in the different regions, counties, towns, countries, whatever it is, wherever we're looking, Australia, in Europe, in the United States, in a lot of different, obviously, states and destinations. It's ever changing, and we need to stay on top of that, because I see that as a single biggest threat to our industry overall. But I think us as professional managers, we have the ability to make an impact here if we really talk about the type of value that we create as a professional industry. And this could also be a potential for us that we benefit, the professional industry will actually benefit if people really understand what we are all about than somebody who's just rents out his home for a couple of weeks and gets troublemakers into their place. So I think that there's a big differentiation, and we're still being perceived as one industry. And that's one thing that we're fighting about at AGL. We are here to professionalize this industry and support that industry to be professionalized, so people understand what a vacation rental and short-term rental is really all about. And I'm talking about that in a professional manner. So there's still a lot we can do, and we need to stay on top of that and work very closely together. So how do these trends and data pieces that I've used on a high level impact for 2024, and what we recommend for property managers to really focus on or be alerted to? So first of all, prioritize sustainability. Managers must embrace sustainable practices and offer green stays amenities to meet surge in this demand. This is not putting lipstick on a pig, excuse me. This is really making change. I want to do a shout out for Sean Stewart, who's had the closing speech at the ARM conference in Nashville at the end of last year, which put an incredible presentation up where he basically gave an insight of his own property that he's renting out with solar panels, and he's using his electric car that he rents out to his guests as an electric storage place during people's stays during the night. I mean, there is so much we can do. And I think if we get on top of that, and also with our homeowners, and see how we can provide a more carbon neutral stay to consumers and make impact. We still see little shampoo bottles in welcome baskets. I think they have to be time of the past. So that's something we definitely need to do, and I see that as my one of my top priorities. Being a father of 5 children, I want to leave a planet that they can live on as well. Second, I think profitability and financial hygiene is something that we at AGL have been talking about for the last 4 years. Post-COVID, it became very apparent that financial hygiene and understanding profitability in a long run is very important to also weather some storms, and if ADRs come down, and I do believe the market has seen incredible ADRs and occupancy in RevPARs over the last 2-3 years, and we definitely see some softening, and Melanie's going to talk about that as well, the way the data shows us. But I think overall, when markets are softening, macroeconomical environment is definitely not very friendly. Election year, we have 2 wars in the world. We have a lot of international conflicts. We have indebted countries with massive debt that we have never seen before. And if we need to get on top of our own finances and understand our margins and our profits and what do we do with those. So financial hygiene is something I would definitely focus on in 2024. Third, I also believe that still adoption rate on revenue management and yield management in general is still super low and has massive opportunities, especially in uncertain time where data is becoming so relevant. Will have a massive impact on your pricing strategy. So I think we will see some game-changing technologies also based on AI that will help us with our pricing strategies as we can consume big data to help us make decisions, and not just comp sets and data, but really internet big data as well. So AI, we believe, has a massive impact on pricing strategies, and something people need to be conscious of. And I'm sure Melanie will talk about Taylor Swift as well. Okay, and then we move on. The second last is guest experience, remote workers, and digital nomads. It's interesting, for the last 2-3 years, we talked about seamless guest experience, managing expectations and making sure you deliver what you promise. This is now going beyond that, as the traveler is also changing. Post-COVID, we have now 80% vertical awareness by travelers. So everybody knows what an STR is, and now we need to consistently deliver to their expectations for them not to go back to hotels. So that needs an extra notch in what we deliver to them, and make sure we can do that. And that also includes remote workers, providing exact amenities for these type of travelers to help fill your shoulder season and others, which is something that I believe is still totally underserved. I've seen regions where people still don't cater for this type of traveler group, and it's bigger than what we anticipate. Therefore, we need to do something and really understand who are my guests, get to understand the personas, how can I serve those, where do I find them to book them with us. And they're definitely not the ones who are sitting on Airbnb and Booking.com making 60-day bookings. They're going to be somewhere else. So that's definitely something that to be very well aware of and capture. And last but definitely not least is promote effectively. I don't know if ever thought anybody that I'm going to talk about direct bookings here, but I want to talk about it. I think over the years that become evident that OTAs have become so strong. We've become totally OTA lazy. So we just let them handle the demand, and now we're sitting on their drip. And I think there's something we can definitely do there in terms of multi-channel distributions, using as many channels as possible, market your property effectively through direct marketing and other means. Definitely brings opportunities, understanding who your customers are and remarket to them, increase repeat rates, etc., etc. As maybe certain things will get more uncertain, people want to come back to the same places they've been before because they know where they're gone. So there might be some opportunities there as well. So overall, I would pay a lot of attention to that in 24, and also drive some other means of demand than just using two OTA demand channels overall. And that's it from my side. So thank you very much for listening in. I was trying to get some time back. I hope I achieved that. And it was great to be here. And I'll be here for questions as well later on. And I'm handing over to Melanie.
Thanks so much, Simon. I'm excited to continue building on some of your presentation today. I'll also try to be efficient. Simon, I made a note. I loved your AI generated image for the sustainability slide. I feel like it tied a lot of your things together in one go. So I'll continue to build on some of this today and talk about what we're seeing in the data for US and Europe. For those of you who don't know, Key Data is a business intelligence platform. We collect data directly for property managers. We show you how you're performing year over year compared to the market. So all the data I'm showing is from those direct integrations with property managers. And Guesty is a big partner of ours. So excited to be here. I'm going to talk through some things today. We'll talk about supply and demand in both US and Europe, kind of changing seasonality and occupancy. We'll talk about how guests are booking and how that's different than how they were booking last year. Kind of pricing power and recommendations for pricing in 24, and then some emerging and declining markets. Feel free to drop some questions in the Q&A or the chat box, and I'll try to keep an eye on those coming in as well. So supply and demand, I think across a lot of industries, we saw big supply and demand shifts post-COVID. It's not just short-term rentals, it's hotels and airlines and office space and real estate. And so maybe it's helpful to know that we're not alone, but it is still a dynamic and a challenge we're all dealing with currently. I think prior to COVID, I think property managers really focused on the demand side of things for their occupancy rates. Were they getting more reservations? Things kind of flipped, especially in the US in 2021, and supply ended up being equally as important. How many properties are you managing? How many are in your market? And how those supply and demand patterns play into each other. So we're going to look at year-over-year changes in supply and demand for the US. We've got the year-over-year change in demand measured by the number of guest nights booked in yellow, supply in green. This is our direct source data. So for property managers, generally, their trends have reflected kind of the overall market, so including OTAs and rental by owner as well. 2021, we had this huge increase in demand from the prior year. Obviously, 2020 was not a super strong year anywhere, including in most of the US, although there were some destinations that had a really strong summer and fall 2020. We saw people not taking cruises. They weren't traveling internationally. They were taking a lot of week-long trips to US leisure destinations at the mountain and beach. And supply was hanging in there about 19% year over year. 2022, we started seeing a return to some normal travel trends. Still more guests staying in US short-term rentals than ever before. But supply had grown so quickly due to people putting rentals back on the market, and they maybe took off to stay in themselves, or they weren't comfortable with the safety complications of COVID. But also we saw really low interest rates in the US. Real estate was still somewhat affordable, and short-term rental revenues were really high. So there was just like this wave of investor activity and people buying second homes to list as short-term rentals in 2021 and 2022 as well. So in the US, we've now seen supply outpace demand, pushing occupancy rates down. Important to know there's still more guests booking than ever. You just have to work a little harder, be a little more competitive to get those guests to stay in your rental units instead of somebody else's. Looking forward to 2024, we're seeing a bit of a flip there, which is encouraging. I don't know if the flip will stay around. Certainly, that gap is shrinking as supplies growth is slowing down and demand continues to stick around for U.S. short-term rentals. In Europe, however, we've seen the opposite trend. Demand outpacing supply for the past couple of years in Europe. Supply has been a little more constrained. It hasn't grown quite as quickly, and there's been lots of interest in European travel. Simon showed some of that flight data. It's interesting if you look at American travel to Europe, it's back almost to where it was pre-COVID. Europeans are not traveling to the US in the same way. So they've got a little bit of that dynamic that we had here in the US in 2020 and 2021, where more people traveling domestically, less internationally, kind of favoring Europe a little more. Right now, pacing into 2024, we expect to see continued high demand, kind of continue outpacing supply, so pushing occupancy rates up. Obviously, you've got a lot of big demand drivers in Europe this year. The Paris Summer Olympics, you've got the return of the Euro Cup happening in a lot of the UK. And so really important to keep an eye on events. We'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Obviously, supply and demand impacting occupancy, but we're also seeing some crazy seasonality shifts in a lot of markets as well. So looking at the last 6 months in the US on the left, we've got 2023 in orange compared to 2022 in teal. We did have lower occupancy throughout most of last year here in the US. Kind of final for the year overall in the bottom right chart here, we've got 4% lower than the prior year. The US moving into the next 6 months, kind of January and February, starting off a little smaller. Keegan teed this up nicely for me earlier. Starting to see kind of a level out and even a little growth over last year through the summer months. I'll talk about this as well. We're seeing some big changes in the booking window. Kind of what we're calling, key data is calling for the US overall is a slight decrease in occupancy, which we may see continue to develop. Slight increases in rates, hopefully flat revenues compared to this year. We'll continue to see some variation. It'll depend on the market you're in, but hopefully we're done with some of the big year-over-year shifts and kind of disruptions that we've seen in the last few years. And important to note that in the US, we're still outpacing 2019. We've held on to some extra occupancy, extra revenue, extra demand over where we were in 2019. And in the US, we're seeing the largest growth in the shoulder seasons. So people during 2020, 2021 were not tied to their desk. They weren't tied to their kids' school desk either. And so they were traveling during some of those non-traditional travel period. That's kind of stuck around. So if you look at 23 in orange compared to 19 in the kind of mint green, the largest increases have been April, May, September, October. Super important to keep an eye on that shoulder season or off-peak travel as you set prices for 2024 or the rest of 2024. Europe, we saw a bit of a stabilization during the last 6 months of the year. So 23 very much in line with 2022. It's very variable across Europe right now. So Southern Europe markets had a really strong year last year. Some of the Central European markets were a little slower. UK kind of flat over last year. Next 6 months for Europe overall, we're seeing some occupancy pick up from the prior year, which is encouraging. And hopefully we'll continue to see some of that occupancy recovery in Europe. We're also seeing strong shoulder seasons in Portugal and Spain and some of the other European countries as well. So here we're looking at 2023 in blue compared to 2022 in orange. And you'll see that really their largest year-over-year growth was in January, February, and then September and October. Summer was kind of right in line with the prior year. Airlines have noticed this too. The travel season for Europe has really extended. People are still obviously concentrating their trips during the summer months, but seeking out some of those shoulder season trips as well, probably in part driven by high occupancy rates, but also what Simon was referencing with global warming. Italy, Portugal, Spain, not always as pleasant to be in August. And so people pushing their trips to some of the kind of the cooler months as well. Guests right now in both the US and Europe are looking for shorter stays and they're booking closer to arrival. So we've got last year on the left and Q1 on the book so far on the right. In the US, stay lengths were down about 3% year over year last year. The 3% decline doesn't seem huge, but if you don't make up for that with 3% more stays, then your generating nights and revenue are going to go down as well. So important to keep an eye in 24, maybe encouraging slightly longer stay lengths or increasing your marketing to pick more guests up. Booking windows declining year over year. You'll notice moving into Q1, it looks like the average booking window is a little longer right now. A lot of those guests are waiting until under 30 days out from arrival to book their trip. So we'll see that booking window compress as we move through February and March here in the US. Similar trends in Europe as well, slightly shorter stays. It's a great way for price-conscious travelers to spend a little less on their trip so they can stay 4 days instead of 5, booking window compressing as well. So really important to keep an eye, especially on stay length restrictions right now, where a 5 or 6 day minimum stay length may have worked really well for some of our 2022, 2023 travel seasons. You may be driving some guests away right now, so maybe a good time to revisit a 4-day minimum instead. Prices declining a little bit in the US, so down 6% year over year last year, starting to see some stabilization moving into Q1. Europe saw higher prices last year, so 4% above 2022, continuing to see a 4 to 5% increase in 2024 as well. Obviously, very market dependent. Depends on the type of property you're managing as well. So be sure to keep an eye on hyperlocal data. Even as rates are declining in the US, we're seeing a ton of pricing power around events. So I am bringing in Taylor Swift. Somebody had to do it. Her 2-day weekend or 2 shows in Denver last summer drove prices almost double above what they were the prior year. So again, we've got 23 in blue, 2022 in orange for Denver. And you can see this huge price increase that happened, and travelers and concert goers were willing to absorb that and pay it. So even if prices are coming down a little bit during some of the lower seasons, do keep an eye on big event and demand generators in your market. And not everybody is keeping an eye on this. We're looking here in London for June so far, and her tour dates in June are not capturing higher prices. Property managers, hosts may not necessarily be keeping an eye on it and increasing their rates accordingly. We see the same thing in places like Mexico for the solar eclipse happening in April. Rates are not higher there, even though occupancy is double what it was at this time last year for that weekend. So super important to track events and price accordingly. Okay, finally, I'll wrap up with some emerging and declining markets based on revenues last year. US down 13% overall on a per property basis, obviously forcing some really difficult conversation with homeowners. Southeast and Western US were kind of the regions hit the hardest. They were also regions that had kind of blossomed and grown in 21 and 22. So just a little more room for readjustment, a little further to fall. And we're seeing those trends kind of hold true throughout Q1, although Q1 US revenues not declining to the same extent they were at this time last year. Again, pointing towards a little bit of stabilization year over year. In Europe overall, revenues were helped out by slightly higher rates last year. It increased 3% year over year. In Portugal and Spain, with some of the largest year over year growth, driven by a lot of that off-season travel. We expect to see that continuing into 2024 as well. Especially Q1, not always the most popular travel season for Southern Europe. So especially encouraging, you can see that off-season travel growth here as well. So key takeaways, 2023 travel landscape continued to change. For US travelers, they started going back to Europe. They started cruising again. It kind of cut down on demand for Europe or for US short-term rentals. Across the world, consumers are price sensitive. We've all dealt with a lot of inflationary pressure in the last couple of years, although it is starting to stabilize. They know how to find the best deals. They're savvy. They're going to look at your competitors. They'll look for alternative destinations to travel to. Supply growth has slowed down, particularly in the US. It's still up, still outpacing demand to some extent. And so occupancy rates, revenues have all softened in the US, still pacing ahead of where we were in 2019. Europe kind of seeing a mix of some KPIs up, some down, revenues overall for the continent and up year over year. So 2024 is looking similar to 2023 thus far, but as always, there are opportunities to capitalize. In the US, what we're seeing for our property managers so far is demand starting to kind of catch up to supply. So there could be some upward pressure on occupancy. Again, it's really early to tell, so we'll see how things change. Off seasons, the shoulder seasons are increasing in popularity around the world, and event demand is creating really incredible pricing power. And throughout all of it, it'll continue to change and evolve throughout the year. It's very market dependent. So the property managers, the hosts that will do really well are going to be data driven. They'll use ever changing data and pay attention to market trends to price and manage their companies accordingly. So thank you all. You find out more about us at keydatadashboard.com.
Wonderful. Awesome. Thanks, Melanie. A lot of data. A lot of data, which is really great coming into a new year. Really cool to see what it looks like when you are able to drill down into that specific data. Looking at that ADR jump in Denver compared to London for Taylor Swift is actually pretty insane. To see like the potential missed opportunity there just due to outside factors. So moving into our next presentation here, I want to welcome to the stage Willie Chang. So Willie, if you want to go ahead and share your screen. But as kind of a lead in here, we're going to do this a little different than we normally do. I'm kind of going to have a back and forth with Willie and Melanie, and Simon can chime in here as they see fit, just because we want to take a lot of this data that Simon and Melanie have put in front of us, along with their takeaways for PMs, and really flesh it out to what can this kind of inform as an overall strategy for a property management company, and how to make sure that we are doing these recommendations that Simon mentioned in terms of being sure that you're focusing on profitability and you're aware of what is your revenue during your low season and so on and so forth. So to kind of fully connect all these dots that have been laid on the page, I want to ask Willie that question. How today are we distilling everything that we've heard from Simon and Melanie to actual like takeaways for PMs in structuring their overall business model? And that's our kind of leading question, more or less. So with that being asked, Willie, do you want to go ahead and take it away?
Sure. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening for everyone all over the world. Thank you for having me, Guesty and Keegan. I'm excited to expand on my knowledge on this webinar. Let me share my screen. So Yanni and I started the business on 2018, and it has grown all over the location, namely in Hawaii, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. And we operate in a luxury rentals, highly constrained environment to protect the homeowner's revenue and occupancy. And recently, we were selected by ADNA as the tops in our 17 markets. We are top revenue performer, all in all. So these are some of our predominant locations that we operate in currently.
So question, Willie, on if you want to jump back to that slide with your locations. Something that I've noticed here, and just for context for the crowd, Willie and I have actually worked personally together since like 2019 when I first joined Guesty. We were supposed to meet up for lunch in San Francisco, but it was March 2020. So the world had other plans for us when that first came up. But looking at this map, you're all over the place, right? Like except the Northeast. I don't know if you have beef against the Northeast. No, I'm kidding. But you have properties anywhere from Washington State to Hawaii, which are two very different markets, even operating at different seasons. So I want to ask, is that for a specific reason that you are displaced so widely instead of focusing in one area, as I've seen other PMs do, where they hit a market particularly well and then they expand into a neighboring market or perhaps a similar market since they've gotten good at that dynamic?
Yes. First of all, exceptional demo by Melanie and Simon. Melanie addressed supply, demand, and ebbs and flow on occupancy area and such. The supply, we address that by focusing on highly constrained environment. The demand will be related to money supply that I will address it much later in this call. Now, the important part is how do you design a good business by diversifying in different location. But before that, take a back seat. What is the definition of a good business? A good business is a simple, predictable, free cash flow generating machine. If you can predict your cash flow, if you cannot predict your cash flow, you do not know the value. If you do not know the value, the investor will not invest. So having said that, you're trying to design the business that is opposing in seasonality. For example, when Hawaii is in high season, the San Francisco is in a lower season, and so on and so forth, so that we have a stable cash flow to the homeowners to protect the cash flow and investment. At the same time, the company also will have a stable cash flow if the bookings are all good and stable across the board. Further to that, we also focus on booking windows. We focus to invest in areas where there's a far out booking window so that we have revenues on the plate. In low season, if you're all in the last minute booking windows, uh, it's very uncertain environment. So we also diversify not on seasonality and climate. We also diversify in booking windows, far out booking windows, such that the totality of the business is stable and the payout to the homeowner is also stable at the same time.
So I know you mentioned that you're primarily dealing with luxury rentals here, which I imagine, or in my experience, have typically a larger booking window, especially if they're bigger luxury rentals. People are typically booking further out in advance. So just to be sure I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, you're saying that you have a subset of inventory to offset those luxury listings that are a shorter booking window and a more quick turnaround? Or are you saying that it's the longer booking windows are preferable overall in general because you know that you have business on the books later on?
So longer booking window is definitely a preferable because if you go to a rock concert like Bon Jovi, would you book far out in advance? That means intrinsically higher demand. You're
Hmm.
trying to acquire inventory with a higher, longer booking window in the first place, but you cannot get all the same. So we offset that with the last minute booking windows, but in totality, we prefer a longer booking windows so that it improves the liquidity of the company at the same time. Does that answer your
Got it.
question? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So talking about optimizing your portfolio by offsetting, we talked about geographic expansion, which kind of ties in with climate or seasonality more or less. So the San Francisco and Hawaii example. We talked about booking windows in terms of booking further out from your check-in date or booking closer for a last minute booking. I'm noticing this last bullet here, microeconomic trends. Anytime I see a micro or macro word, I get nervous and start sweating a little bit. But I imagine the next kind of like proliferation of this, if we were to go bigger from here,
Mhm.
is outside of diversification through states in the US, is we'd be looking at countries. Is that correct?
Correct.
What's the kind of economics there in your opinion? If you had to summarize it in like 2 minutes, because I know we're not, I'm sure we could do a whole webinar on macroeconomic trends between countries, but what's your kind of summary?
In the same pattern I spoke earlier of opposing seasonality in locations diversification, exactly the same concept. You take it up in a country level where you have an opposing macroeconomic scenario. For example, in the last 12 months, US has a high growth and high inflation. If you have high growth and high inflation, you know the tightening will happen. So the ADR will come down. In that moment, imagine you have a diversification on a different countries. In Asia, for example, at that time has a falling growth and falling inflation, you will see ADR start to rise because the government have to print the money.
Hmm.
So you could use the cash flow on the different countries while US in recession to offset. At the end of the day, it stabilize your cash flow in totality. So that is why I'm trying to say the Holy Grail is just a bunch of uncorrelated bets in location, in countries, so that the bets diversify each other or offset each other to produce a reduction of risk without a reduction in returns. by and large, we can reduce the reduction in risk by 80% globally because when the next COVID happened, can never be 100%.
Right.
The
Right.
pandemic happens, the whole world is impacted unless you have a space travel to Mars. In that case, 100% reduction in risk. The point is not about math. The point is to induce the concept why
Yeah. Yeah.
total uncorrelated bets that will reduce your risk in totality.
I'm curious, Melanie, to tap you into this because I coming from the US standpoint, I can totally see what Willie's point in real time with high inflation, high growth is leading to ADR to start to steadily dip off because that's where we are in our cycle, more or less. I noticed a lot of year over year growth in EMEA that you were showing. Would you attribute that to where Europe in general, European countries are in economic cycles, or is it more akin to other factors, or is it something that we're not entirely sure?
I mean, I don't think anybody's ever entirely sure in case, unless you're
Valid,
doing like
valid.
hours and hours of research on that. Um, I mean, it's always a combination of things. I think one major difference in Europe and the US right now is Europe is still kind of on a recovery and growth trajectory across a lot of the continent. And then US had this huge growth in 21 and some of 22, obviously tied to inflation and money being pumped into the economy by the federal government. So Europe is just like a little behind
Makes
that
sense.
curve right now too. But we
Okay.
did see, I don't know, fun little tidbit. Um, we saw with all the stimulus checks that went out in the US in 2020 and 2021, huge upticks in short-term rental bookings at the same time. So certainly some of that excess money in the economy directly impacted the short-term rental
Oh
market.
yeah. Yeah, I got that stimmy check in the mail. I was ready to travel, you know? Put
Hopefully
it put
booking
it
direct
on.
instead of via Airbnb again, but
Of course, of course. I'm always I my little trick is I always look to see who the host is, and if it's a company name, I Google their name to see if I can find it. I tell everyone that I
that's my
can to do
my
that.
biggest flex in the friend group is hey, you can spend or save
Same, same.
$500 and book that directly with the PM.
100%. Awesome. Okay, cool. Willie, I really appreciate you walking us through this. Kind of, it's anytime, like I said, anytime I hear macro, microeconomic, I get a little scared, but this kind of makes perfect sense to take a look at just as simple
Let
as
me
the
quickly
seasons
jump
in
in here,
Hawaii are
Keegan.
different than SF. Yeah, Simon, what's up?
Just share my quick view on this. I mean, I can make that simple, and I don't want to start a storm here to imposing on Willie,
With
but
4 minutes left in the
exactly.
webinar.
But at the end of the day, to support what Melanie said, at the end of the day, thanks for globalization during current times, and we have cycles everywhere, and that's ultimately what this boils down to, and what Willie is talking about. And when
Yeah.
we had the brief of this conversation, it really strongly resonates. It comes across extremely scientific and challenging to put across. But ultimately, we're looking at different economical cycles in different geographical regions of which you can benefit in all aspects. We've seen that in travel. We've seen that for investment of assets. Where is money cheaper than in other places, etc. And that's cyclical. But thank God we're still interconnected for globalization. So because that's what's keeping us up right now.
I think
Absolutely.
I'll add one other thing I think we're going to continue to see more of in 2024 is destinations really coming into the spotlight and then leaving. You know, a lot of traveler surveys are saying right now that they're looking for new places. They're looking for alternatives to like the super hot, expensive places. Hot isn't popular, probably also
Yeah.
hot isn't it's very warm outside. And so they're looking for kind of lesser known alternatives. And I think people, especially younger generations, are traveling based on social media. So I think we'll continue to see like destinations really popular and attractive for one summer and then maybe fading out a little bit the next season. So just super important to keep an eye on those cycles and changing trends right now.
I totally agree with the TikTok take as well as that increase in shoulder season that you were identifying, Melanie. Like I personally have experienced that myself where I live in LA, but my family's on the East Coast. Traditionally, if I want to fly home for the holidays, it's a wreck. Like it's over $1,000 for me to do that. But because I work remote now, I can be a lot more flexible with when I go instead of going close because I have to be conscious of my PTO. I can go at the end of October for Thanksgiving or the beginning of November. And then I can look for these opportunities of, well, I can't stay with my family for a month, obviously. So I need to offset this with other areas. And that's where short-term rentals have really been my best friend as time has gone on. Awesome. We definitely ran over with all of our presentations, but I think it's a great webinar to run over on the presentation because all this data was incredibly useful. I want to just ask one question I saw from the Q&A here while we have this poll up here, in case people want to learn more about Guesty. As I was mentioning earlier on, a lot of these tools that are kind of up and coming with mobile first and AI technology, Guesty is really in the weeds with these functionalities and iterating to be sure that our customers are set up for success in every one of these regards. But one of the questions that I saw here that I thought was pretty interesting is, do we know anyone on the panel as to why Vrbo is down so much for pacing this year, as someone's seen from multiple of their clients? Does anyone have a specific answer to this off the top?
Um, I think there were maybe some issues with switching over fully to Expedia's platform in one
Yeah.
key. I also think one of the main things going on is a decline in some of the destinations that Vrbo is traditionally super hot in. So again, people are going back to Europe, they're going back to the cities and maybe booking on Airbnb for those markets instead of Vrbo. So again, kind of a complicated answer to that one.
I think that totally makes sense. I would also say, just as time has gone on and interest in Verbo has surged amongst consumers and professional hosts, you're looking at an increase in supply on Verbo as well, which would naturally dampen occupancy across anyone that was previously on Verbo, as we're seeing it overall in the market in general.
And as people continue to switch towards shorter, cheaper stays, but closer to arrival, that's not your traditional Vrbo booking.
So all righty. Well, thank you everyone for taking the time to join today. I know we didn't get to go through too many questions, more than one, but I really appreciate everyone's insights. I'm glad we all got to jump in on Willie's slides there to really talk about the bigger global trends here. So thank you, Simon. Thank you, Melanie. Thank you, Willie. Thank you, everyone in our audience. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.